Okay, so we are about to begin. We will begin with assuming the pro. Yeah? Okay, for sure. On the topic, what's the res?
Resolve the benefits of
Resolve the benefits
of the United States use of offensive cyber operations outweigh the harms.
Okay, we're debating offensive cyber operations today. We'll hear the affirmative opening to begin.
Just before I begin, just a short introduction. My name is Jay Wu, and I was debating at Ace Academy for several years now. And yeah, it's a short debate. I hope you guys understand a lot and get to know what debate is about.
Can you all hear him fine, or does it need to be louder? A little louder? A little louder? Okay. Louder.
Okay, so I'll just project my voice then. Is everyone ready? Okay. We affirm with one observation, cyber operations work differently than other conventional warfare. The head of U.S. Cyber Command, General Netcoast, says in 2019 that cyber operations are not always publicly acknowledged by either side. U.S. operations are calibrated to stay well below the threshold of war by carrying out persistent low-level digital attacks. Ultimately, military and intelligence agencies always weigh the cost of a cyber operation and the risk of loss of information ahead of a strike. OCOs are defined as operations to disrupt targeted computers on the cyberspace. They also include waging what is called a cyber war to fend off attacks made by other countries. Our first contention is that OCOs deter the escalation of conflict. U.S. dominance in offensive cyber warfare is a deterrence. Congress from 2015 states that U.S. superiority in cyber war would have the advantages of degrading enemy forces and averting a more expansive cyber war. The U.S. should maintain an unmatched capability to conduct counter-military cyber war. OCOs are used as preemptive measure. Thus, having this deterrent stops many attacks that would have otherwise happened. Christopher from 2019 from the Business Insider tells you that governments are fending off constant attacks from adversaries. The UK's National Security Centre says it repels about 10 attempted cyber attacks from hostile states every week. Though the capacity of attack is there, state actors are fearful to pull the trigger. The fear of retaliation kept many hackers in check. If we didn't have this deterrence, a successful cyber attack could devastate the economy. The Council on Economic Advisors writes in 2019 that an attack launched against electric grids could affect large swaths of the U.S. economy because most economic activities depend on access to electricity. Financial markets could be attacked to reduce trust in the system. Economic analysis concludes that cyber attacks on critical infrastructure can cause damage up to $1 trillion. OCOs are the reason why these attacks do not happen. Our second contention is on securing trade in the Strait of Hormuz. Al Jazeera quantifies that the Strait of Hormuz controls 30% of global oil exports, translating to 18.5 billion barrels a single day. The Strait of Hormuz is a way for Iran to express their dissatisfaction and make countries to listen to their interests. Even blocking the waterway temporarily would substantially increase world energy prices, which Forbes concludes even a temporary disruption in the strait would increase a barrel by $175. Which calculates to a 400% increase in the price. However, OCOs have degraded Iran's ability to target oil tankers in two ways. First, the nature of cyber operations used against Iran. Barnes from the New York Times articulates in 19 that American cyber operations are designed to change Iran's behavior without initiating a broader conflict or prompting retaliation, as cyber operations can demonstrate strength and show that the U.S. will respond to attacks or other hostile acts and impose costs. Secondly is empirically. Washington Post records in 2019 a cyber attack against Iran in June wiped out a critical database used by Iran to plot attack against oil tankers and degraded Tehran's ability to covertly target shipping traffic in the Persian Gulf. The cyber strike was designed to be debilitating, and Iran is still trying to restore data, but proportionate and not so provocative as to result in escalation in conflict. The impacts are twofold. The first impact is preventing a global recession. Oil is a crucial component in the production of goods. The Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco states increasing oil prices stifle the growth of the economy by raising the overall cost of doing business. St. Louis Fed quantifies that a 13% increase in oil prices increases the probability of a recession by 90%. The more the price increases, the higher the probability and the shorter the time frame of the next recession. This is because Zimmerman 08 quantifies that every cent rise in the oil price costs American consumers $1 billion a year. This in turn harms the citizen. Tufts University articulates that the last global recession plunged 100 million people into poverty, and the Telegraph adds that the recession killed over 500,000 due to only lack of access to healthcare. The second impact is exacerbating world hunger. The UNEP explains that food security and production is heavily contingent on the price of oil, which is required for production and transportation. Quartz finds that cutting oil prices by half will reduce malnourishment by 40% and feed 110 million people. And luckily, WTI finds that current oil prices are dropping. Unfortunately, by negating this resolution, you will cause a spike in oil prices and reverse this process. Thus, we strongly affirm.
Very good. So, before we move into the negative opening, just for you all. Okay, what were the affirmative contentions? There were two. What were they? Yeah.
Deterrence and security.
Yeah, on the Strait of Hormuz, right? Okay, good. Now, the first argument is about deterrence. How does offensive cyber operations affect deterrence? What was the argument? How does us having really cool cybersecurity and more cyber offense skills, why does that deter other people? What was their analysis? Yeah.
Because they're scared that if they attack the U.S., then they'll be attacked. There'll be a retaliation.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Not having Wi-Fi is pretty crappy. Very good. Okay. Contention number 2. That was the economy to the Strait of Hormuz analysis. Right. Now, what does that argument say? How does offensive cyber operations affect the Strait of Hormuz? What was their argument there? Yeah.
It's like by using like offensive cyber operations, they can cause like a bit of deterrence in the Strait of Hormuz by allowing like Iran to not attack that place.
Exactly, right? And they gave 2 different warrants for that. One of the warrants, right, was the idea that it's happened before. We have attacked Iran and it hindered their ability to track naval vessels and those types of things. What were the impacts to the argument? Yeah.
Keeping oil prices down in the United States and therefore keeping the economy stable and helping citizens so that they don't have to pay as much.
Okay, that is the argument about the economy. But there's a secondary impact, though. What was that one? Shoot.
World hunger.
How does oil prices affect hunger, though? Oil's dead, so I don't confuse about the argument. How does that happen? What's the machinations behind that? What's the logic? How do oil prices affect food? Yeah.
So, food gets exported by oil, and if the oil prices drop, it'll
Very good. Part of it is really just like the raw transportation. 1/3 of agriculture cost comes from just getting the food from point A to point B. So your food cost $1.30, cents of that came from transportation, as they kind of went through that. Good. So you have the oil argument, and we have the oil use of recession argument, and we have the hunger argument. Very good. We will now move into the con order.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Maybe a little louder.
Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Lauren, and I'm a senior trainer here at BCA. And I've also attended this academy for a few years now, so yeah. Nice meeting. Okay. With that being said, Joseph and I negate and resolve the benefits of the United States' use of offensive cyber operations outweigh the harms. Our sole contention is increasing aggression. U.S. offensive cyber operations increase aggression in 3 ways. The first way is to provoking our adversaries. Greenberg 19 from The Wired explains that U.S. offensive cyber operations will only provoke adversaries like Russia to launch even more aggressive attacks, as gaining more access to Russian networks would convince them to maintain the same access to American networks. Indeed, this is empirically proven by Jensen 19 from the Cato Institute, who finds that while only 4% of U.S. cyber attacks are successful, 32% result in retaliatory action. For this reason, Schmidt 19 writes that Russia is conducting cyber operations against critical American infrastructure in the status quo. The second way is through pressuring our adversaries to take action. Slayton 15 from the Harvard Kennedy School explains that offensive operations increase adversaries' readiness to take offensive action and increases distrust, risking further conflict. Additionally, she finds that these operations increase vulnerabilities as focusing on launching offensive operations leads to a trade-off with defensive strategies, leaving critical infrastructure vulnerable to attack. Subsequently, cyber operations would increase tension so much that Gomper from the RAO Center finds that cyber attacks will trigger regular warfare, creating a pathway to the use of military force, creating a worse catastrophe. The third way is for legitimizing our adversaries' actions. March 19 from the Washington Post explains that offensive hacking by the U.S. will prompt other nations to increase their hacking on their own, as when the U.S. uses new weapons to increase its own security, other states follow through. Indeed, White House Cybersecurity Coordinator Mike Daniel warns that U.S. cyber strikes would allow the adversary nations to claim their offensive hacking as acceptable behavior, finding that we will be legitimizing such actions. The impacts are twofold. The first is prompting backfire. Betsy Cooper from the Aspen Institute explains that the uses of offensive cyber operations will leak out to criminals and our adversaries where it would be used against it. Indeed, Weinstein 19 from the USA Today confirms that this is exactly what Russia is waiting for, where they're waiting to case study an American cyber aggression. Second is harming civilian infrastructure. Cherovich 19 from TechCrunch reports that cyber confrontation between the US and Russia is increasingly turning to critical civilian infrastructure, particularly power grids. Problematically for the U.S., Bosler, White House's Homeland Security Advisor, points out that the U.S. economy and infrastructure are far more reliant on digitalization and automation than Russia's, giving Russia an inherent advantage in any future cyber war. Any cyber attack on power grids is dire. The Cambridge Center for Risk Studies issued a report on losses for when a possible cyber attack on American power grid. The scenario involved an electricity blackout that plunges 15 U.S. states into darkness and leaves 93 million people without power. It would result in a rise in mortality rates as health and safety systems fail and a decline in trade and ports shut down as infrastructure collapses. This is important as Boschman from Reuters finds that 50,000 patients are treated and saved each year by United States hospitals. For these reasons and many more, we're so proud to negate.
Very good. Now, negative had only one contention. What was the contention? Yeah. Help her out.
Increasing aggression.
Very good. And there were 3 different ways that they can increase aggression. So what were those arguments? What was the first one? Let's see. Someone haven't called on yet. I can volunteer someone, or you can volunteer someone. Try again. What you got? Yeah, it was the provoking argument, right? The infrastructure, I think, was more so about the impact that they had at the end, but the provoking of other countries. Now, what country in particular are you provoking with offensive cyber operations? Yeah.
Russia.
Who?
Russia.
Russia. Very good, and they get that really interesting stat, right? But out of all cyber attacks, only what? 9% were successful, but that's a 32% increase in retaliations, right? Which means that there's a trade-off that is negative. What was their second major warrant or reason they had? We had provoking being one of them. Yeah, what you got?
It pressurizes adversaries to take action and
Yeah.
increases distrust.
Yeah, very good. And what was third? Yeah.
Triggering regular warfare.
Exactly. It becomes legitimized, right? When someone has attacked you, you have the right to self-defense, and as a result, we have seen escalation in the conflict. Now, what is the impact to the argument? What did they go for as their sole impact? What do y'all think? Yeah.
The power grids would be electricity would, power grids would be much more sensitive here, and so in that many people would be without electricity, and also they mentioned how patients in hospitals would be lacking electricity, so really necessary infrastructure would go down.
Yeah, very good. How is that different though than like conventional warfare? Do you understand my question? Under the rules of war, do people usually attack hospitals and power grids?
No.
No. They are targeting civilian infrastructure, right? Critical civilian, like power, right? Why would a country do that? Why wouldn't they attack like an aircraft carrier, or like a missile defense system, or those kinds of things? Yeah.
To destabilize the country.
It destabilizes the country. Yeah. Building off of that. What?
Leads to civilian panic.
Civilian panic, and under a democracy, right? Maybe that would lead to a change. and we'll be talk about that in a second. Let's see Crossfire.
So it's just a clarification.
Louder.
Clarification on your. You said you had two impacts. What was your first impact talking about?
Oh yeah, so our first impact was on backfire because we tell you that offensive cyber operations are basically going to leak out like information to like criminals and adversaries or adversaries.
But how
right?
exactly
So,
will that happen?
because that's exactly like what offensive cyber operations do.
Well, offensive cyber operations are done within the government. It's not like someone in the government is going to start leaking them out too.
No, it's because like just the usage of it would leak out to criminals and other adversaries.
Okay,
And that's
so how
exactly
does
what
that
Russia
work?
is waiting for right now. For any like case study on any like aggressive attack that the US is bound to take.
How are those criminal organizations able to see the uses of the offensive cyber operations?
Because it's going to leak out.
Yeah, but how? Like, what exactly is the mechanism?
Because it can be through like case studies, it can be just be like leakage of data or information. Like there are multiple ways. Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
So let's talk about your first contention.
Mhm.
So doesn't the US spend more on offensive cyber operations than defensive cyber operations in the status quo? Because they're basically like, they get a certain budget and like they basically have to like divide that up. But they spend more on offensive than defense.
The thing with cyber operations, however, is that there isn't really an offensive or defensive in terms of the technology itself. Because if someone else were to attack the United States, then they have to wage what is called, sounds silly, but it is a cyber warfare. It's when like the two cyber operations go
Okay,
against
but that's
each
not my
other.
question. Like, doesn't the US spend more on offensive cyber operations than defensive in the status quo? It's just a simple yes or no.
Do you know the answer to that question?
Yes, they do,
Yeah,
right?
so
So
where's
if
that
that's true,
evidence
so
from?
if that's true, like, let me just ask you a question. So if that's true, then under that case, then if the US, like, let's say through like adversaries or like when they're like under an attack, doesn't that make them more vulnerable to like damaging like critical infrastructure, let's say?
No, it wouldn't, because the technology essentially, like the money that you spend is.
Okay, so where in your part does it
used
state
to-
that defensive like cyber operations are enough to prevent against critical
Okay,
infrastructure?
before we move on to there, could you go backtrack and actually prove that the US spends much more on offensive than cyber?
Yeah, I can show you
defense?
later.
Sure.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so on your first contention, your only contention, you talk about provoking adversaries. And then you mentioned the stats of how only 4% of all cyber attacks or operations are successful, but they
Yeah,
gave
US
you
cyber attacks.
US cyber attacks, and then there's a 32% retaliation. What exactly is 32% retaliation?
Like, it's just retaliation against an attack that the United States makes, which is why in the status quo, you see that between Russia and the
Out of,
United
like,
States,
total
there's cyber attacks.
Out of total attacks, there's a 32%
Like, out of all
increase
the,
from
like, out of
Russia.
all the attacks that the United States makes, there's a 32% retaliation, and that was a case study performed by Jensen 19.
Okay, could I take a look at the card after?
Sure,
Do you have a question?
that's fine.
Okay. So, you all notice how they asked a very particular question and how on the negative, she kept on pressing them about points about like offensive cyber developments. It showcases foresight and obviously advancement of strategy that we'll see in a second. Now we'll move into the rebuttal speeches, but does the affirmative need prep first?
Yeah, we need prep. Can the prep time start when we get the book?
Oh, yeah.
Taking prep. Notice how both teams of partners are talking to one another. Notice how even though the affirmative speaks next, the negative is already preparing their speech to go. Right? There's a lot of subtle things that happen in the background as they continue. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, I'm Kevin. I think grade 11. Oh, that rhymes. Yeah. Okay, that's perfect. I'm a really nice guy, so I hope everyone has fun today, and yeah, I also do fun, so that's all good.
Really named it.
All right.
Ready? Okay.
I think when the resolution says that we're weighing the benefits and harms, I think it is at this point that both sides need to prove why the benefits outweigh the harms today, and I think side affirmative is going to be the only side to do this at this point. Alright, let's move on to their only contention about increased aggression. When they bring up this 4% card, we think that makes absolutely no sense when we look at this card. First of all, we think when they talk about the 32% retaliatory measures, these are just like little attacks on the infrastructure. There's nothing major. We think that at the point where we have deterrence methods and then the other side isn't willing to go that far, it doesn't make sense at all. Where they're trying to tell you that where it's going to escalate into major cyber war. We think that this is just an arm wrestle between two powerful nations to show how strong it is. We think at this point of diplomatic arm wrestling, if the point the U.S. backs down, we think this makes the United States look weak, and it is at this point where this is really bad for U.S. foreign policy and decision making around the world. Let's go on to the comparative. We think at the point is first of all, cyber attacks have a low risk of escalation than other offensive strategies. This is ultimately better than imposing economic sanctions or whatnot. As Bogart 2018 states, cyber operations have self-dampening mechanisms. Attribution can take time. There are varying thresholds of confidence attribution. Time affects a target's ability to marshal response, let alone of escalatory. It takes time and resources to develop offensive capabilities. Cyber weapons lack the universal lethality of most conventional weaponry. A strategic bomber, we think, and it is at this point where this means that cyber weapons are just used for diplomacy and just showing the United States' strength. But secondly, on the comparative, we think that a world where we use superior offensive capabilities is actually key for deterrence. We're able to deter major forces. As Gropper 2015 states, for cyber war on military targets during armed conflicts, the United States should attain or maintain offensive superiority in order to offset its cyber vulnerabilities, retain its overall military operational advantage, and gain its escalation control. For retaliation, the United States should have the ready-to-use capabilities to visit unacceptable costs on systems critical to operations and control the functions on benefiting states. Despite the United States engaging in offensive cyber warfare now, we think that is much better for a couple reasons. When you're able to assert your dominance, that's much better to make decisions across the key situations across the world, like North Korea or Iran or whatnot. But secondly, we think that they're not going to engage in this big cyber war that the side of opposition tries to paint them as. We don't think Russia and the United States are very irrational actors that are willing to go to war. We think when they're able to engage in these operations, what happens is that they're going to be forced to the diplomacy table. It is another use for diplomacy. We think that in no situation where it has led to trillions of damages, but when we have the abilities to show Russia that we're strong and we have the abilities to fight against their cyber offensive weapons and show that what they did during the 2016 election was unacceptable, it's at this point where we think deterrence is actually the key in order to stop Russia, because it actually shows U.S. power and it shows that USA is number one. All right. And then furthermore, this is also another impact about how deterrence is actually key to prevent civilian infrastructure from cyber attacks. As Gomper 2015 states that the United States should seek a minimized danger of unrestricted cyber war in which critical economic, governmental, and societal systems and services are disrupted. Given how difficult it is to protect such systems, the United States must rely on the heavy extent of deterrence and thus the threat of retaliation. The United States Defense Department has stated that a would-be attacker would suffer unacceptable costs if it launches a cyber attack on the United States. These offensive capabilities show U.S. power. U.S. power is good because USA should, in the best interest of the United States, are able to make critical decisions across the world. Thus, we affirm.
Very good. Okay, I'm gonna give you a really nice outside of round, but I guess it's aggressive in round, which is good. So we'll be moving into the rebuttal of the pro. One thing that you all would notice though in the speech was that he was very methodical right? He moved down the flow, answering the arguments in the order that they were received. That way it lends more credibility, more organization, those types of things. There was the cross-application of the original case onto the negative case and the bolstering of additional evidence. Very solid job on how they would solve for the problem. Okay, ready for the punch?
Okay. Okay, so my name is Joseph, and starting this year, I'm a trainer. So I've debated for a couple years now. So I look forward to working with all of you this year. Having said that, the order of my speech is going to go responding to what Kevin just said against my case, and then moving down with their case. Is everybody ready? Let's start on Kevin's rebuttal. He gives you 4 responses. The first thing he says is that current adversary attacks are small attacks. That's not true. He ignores the thesis of our case, which is that adversaries like Russia is currently turning off our power grids, and this is reducing power to millions of people and millions of citizens. The second thing he says is that if we pull out of our offensive operations right now, the U.S. will look weak. That's not true. Even if we don't have these offensive operations, we still have our conventional and nuclear capabilities, which will deter aggressors. But third of all, he says OCOs are key to deterring aggression. This argument cannot be any further from the truth, because in the status quo, despite the U.S. having offensive operations, countries like Iran, China, Russia are continually attacking our civilian infrastructure, so clearly OCOs are not deterring aggression, and the fourth response we get is that war won't happen in our world. The war is not the link to our impasse. All we need to prove to is that slight aggression by both sides will damage each other's critical infrastructure, and that's what's going to be causing our harms to our civilians. Let's go to their case. So, at the top, a big overview. Before 2016 in the Obama administration, we were all about defensive operations. We didn't have much offensive operations. Offensive operations that my opponents talk about only came in 2017 once Trump got elected. And once Trump got elected, adversary attacks from Russia has actually increased. So their whole point about OCOs deterring aggression is not true. If you look at what's happening right now, it's only increasing aggression. But then, on their first argument about deterring aggression, they say OCOs will scare our adversaries and they're less likely to attack us. There's 4 responses here. First of all, Jensen in 2019 finds that U.S. offensive operations do not scare countries. They are not scared of our offensive operations, which is why Zukov 17 empirically finds U.S. operations in empirical places like Syria and Ukraine did not change their aggressive behavior. They still keep attacking us. The empirics are disproving their case. But second of all, you can extend Greenberg from our case, who tells you that currently if we attack Russia and get more access to their critical infrastructure, that's only going to persuade them to maintain the same kind of level on our infrastructure, which is why you can extend the Jensen evidence from our case that tells us that OCOs work only 4% of the time, and then 32% of the time, they only increase retaliation. But third of all, according to Flaherty in 19, he explains that current power grid that the U.S. has is now developed with retro technologies. Retro technologies are when these vital infrastructure or computers are taken off the internet. And now if adversaries want to attack us, they need to physically touch our systems, which is nearly impossible. So the status quo is solving for a preemptive strike that my opponents talk about. But then, let's go to their second argument where they discuss about the Hormuz Strait. They say the Hormuz Strait is key for key for oil and key for the economy, and how that's going to be disrupted with that is preserved with offensive operations. There's 3 responses here. First of all, according to Pradler report in 2018, currently the Pentagon has launched like a bunch of warships near the Persian Gulf, which means that they're ready in the case that Iran does attack the Hormuz Strait, which means that ultimately it is going to be solved. But second of all, their analysis is going to short circuit the argument, because they say the Hormuz Strait is key for international oil trade. This is really key, because what Forbes finds in 2018 is that if Iran were to actually launch an attack on the Hormuz Strait, because it will disrupt global trade, it will trigger an international response. And Iran is not likely to survive an international response, because most likely they're going to get heavily sanctioned and cripple their economy. But then, on their impasse, the first thing they talk about is cyber attacks are stopping Iran. They say cyber operations stop like oil tankers from traffic. However, according to Grant in 2019, this is incredibly short term. At best, we're only stopping their capabilities for a couple of months, and after those months end, it's going to reignite this aggression. But then they talk about a global recession here, but it's contingent on the idea that we don't get oil. But they make the argument that 30% of the oil is coming from the Hormuz Strait, meaning that we can just turn to the other 70% of the oil to save the economy and prevent this recession from happening. For these reasons, I urge you to negate it. Thank you.
Very good. So, you also notice from the common rebellionists that they were very organized. They began by refuting the affirmatives attacks against the case, moved into attacking the pro case. You'll notice that there was a lot of war in comparison at the start. This is my argument against theirs. Here's my rationale is better. And then when they attacked the affirmative case, he did a lot of grouping. Their first section was this. Here's what the response is. The second section was this. Here's my 4 responses. On to the impact. Both speakers engaged in a lot of war in comparison. Good coverage and overall very organized. Let's hear the crossfire.
I just want to ask one question.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think increases the likelihood of conflict? Cyber warfare or using conventional warfare?
I say both parties have an interest to not move to conventional warfare, which is why for the past decade we haven't seen a conventional launch between either side, and the most likely is cyber operations. So if they're going to make the argument that if we increase cyber aggression, that's going to lead to like us turning to conventional warfare, I say they're still going to continue with like cyber operations. Can I ask you a question?
Wait, actually, but then your card also states from those time range was from 2006 to 2011. Not that I have a problem with the date or anything, but then in the case where it is a span of 5 years, have we seen any increase of likelihood of a conflict between U.S. and then another party which both engage in cyber?
Yeah, definitely. Tensions are at an all-time high right now. For the first time, both countries are attacking each other's like infrastructure, and I have the part that if this aggression keeps on continuing, that is most likely going to increase like cyber operations to spread to nuclear facilities, which will also increase aggression even more.
Okay, no, that makes no sense. Even in the Cold War, they literally had nuclear weapons everywhere. Why didn't they just attack? Why didn't they just bomb the heck out of each other?
Because of something called mutual destruction.
Exactly. In the case of mutually assured destruction, why would they have any incentive to engage in hard cyber warfare?
What? Okay, so first of all, you're trying to group like cyber warfare and like conventional warfare together. Those are completely different.
Yeah.
Conventional warfare is most likely to physically destruct each countries, but with cyber operations, these are just small, minor attacks to increase tensions and increase aggression in the region. But we've been on this for a minute and 30. Can I ask you a question? So you talked about how Iran is waiting to launch an attack on the Strait of Hormuz, right? Sure. So if you give me a bunch of incentives why Iran will want to do so, why didn't they do so in the past century?
Okay, so what we did explain within our case was that, first of all, that, the reason being is that, literally they just don't want to get, attacked, right?
Exactly, they don't want to get attacked. So when will a point come in which they would attack the Strait of Hormuz?
It is at the point when we see in current tensions where you're saying that how there's so many ships within the region from the Pentagon, and then the U.S. is attacking them. It is at the point where Iran feels like it's cornered. It is that point when it lashes onto the world. That is the point that we want to.
Okay, so Iran feels cornered. They launch an attack on the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. is crippling their economy through sanctions right now. They're clearly pressured. Why didn't they attack?
The reason being is when the point where their economy is crippled, Iran does not care. Iran cares about winning. Iran cares for national pride. I do not think
You're
Iran
contradicting yourself all over its place. You just told me that Iran does not care about sanctions, so why haven't they attacked it?
No, but then the fact is in the current atmosphere when no one bothers Iran, it's completely illogical for Iran to say that I don't want to get sanctioned. But when everyone in the world is attacking them and is feeling like the enemy, Iran's foreign policy and Iran's foreign policy for the past year is that or any autocratic state is that they try to engage in basically bergsmanship, and then they say and they don't want to. Okay.
Does the summary speak any prep?
No.
So, we'll move into the summary speeches then.
Hello, everyone hear me? Okay. Before I start my speech, hi guys, I'm Rose. I'm excited to, with my team here, with all of us here, we're very excited to coach you guys today and for this year, and I hope we'll make it very fun for you guys because we were obviously excited and we had a lot of fun for the week too. All right. Everyone ready? The way to win this round for us is the magnitude. We impact way more than their magnitude with 100 million in poverty and 500,000 people dying. Our lives are equal, and we tell you that we have to save as many lives as possible. With that, start on our observation, which gives you the definitions of OCOs. That was never contested. Cyber operations work differently than other conventional warfare because US operations are calibrated to stay beyond economic disaster or even global disaster or war. We tell you that ultimately, military and intelligence agencies always weigh the cost before they start a cyber strike. This is comparatively better than what they tell you, boots on ground or straight up word bombing. Our opponents want escalation to be further because Joseph Strait has mentioned that without OCOs, the US still has nuclear arsenal and bombs. We see that triggers other countries more than OCOs do with the status quo because OCO is not physical. They try arguing increased aggression, which is their argument. First fact, escalation has been relatively uncommon in cyberspace so far. NEC doesn't give you one empirical example, but only a probability of 32%. But in order for this to be considered legitimate, they have to prove one, why the statistic has an impact because we've seen none. We tell them that all the attack responses are historically minor, not major. They have to prove that the major breach is coming. But second, that is far-fetched. NEG also never gives a scenario about the comparative. Two, they have to prove that why do they outweigh a historical perspective, which we prove, which has an empirical probability of 100%. They simply cannot outweigh that because literally a few weeks ago, the US has stopped cyber attacks that Iran was trying to drown oil ships in the Strait of Hormuz. But secondly, the US uses OCOs only as retaliation or along other forms of diplomacy like Kevin talked about to reduce the likelihood of escalation. This is proven in our case, but which was also never contested. As Lipinski 15 denotes, the US offensive strength could deter enemy escalation because we have the dual advantage of delivering operational benefits by degrading enemy forces and averting war. Okay, and third, SideNet also contradicts themselves and says that with the current technology, it is impossible to touch US computers. Before that, they say that Russia is capable of attacking our power grids. Too late to clarify. But let's go to our case. The most important card that AF drops is Tip Oil and Gas Journal card that emphasizes even blocking the waterway temporarily would substantially increase world energy prices. This is the fastest time frame that you can see in the round, which they never refute. Don't let them get away with that. We tell you that St. Louis Fed quantifies a 13% increase in oil prices increases the probability of a recession by 90%. That is the biggest statistic given far. Here's Iran's incentive. Iran is already heavily sanctioned in the status quo and is trying to disrupt the strait because they don't care what's going to happen to them. Yet, we tell you the United States is the only one trying to stop them from using cyber attacks because we just stopped one a few weeks ago and Iran is still preparing from our operational cyber attacks. We tell you our offense is clear-cut, extend our impacts with scope and also magnitude. We tell you that every cent rise in oil prices causes the American consumers $1 billion a year, 100 million people into poverty, 500,000 people due to a lack of access to healthcare, they died. And we tell you this is far more than what anything else they brought on the table. Thus, please vote for side affirmative.
Solid. Colin, you ready? Okay, for sure. So you'll notice how in the pro summary or the affirmative summary, there was two different ways they wanted to weigh it, right? The first was the magnitude or the severity of the claims, engaging in some rather efficient war in comparison, also going for the time frame for when the Strait of Hormuz gets closed, how quickly the recession will happen, and how it's 90% likely to happen, which means that in order to do that, you have to A, engage in really good overview, right? What are the arguments that you all want to advance in the debate? Not going for everything, but picking 2, 3, or 4 arguments to go for and discussing those in a very in-depth manner in a way to preempt your opponents from arguing against them. We're going for their next. So we'll give the constants time to prepare. We'll continue.
We concede on their weighing on magnitude, but they lose on probability, which is far more important than magnitude, because on our side, we tell you that in the status quo, we're already proving that there are tensions between Russia, Iran, and the United States, and there's already cyber attacks going on between these two countries, right? We tell you that that's really problematic because they're targeting critical infrastructure like power grids. They completely dropped our impact on civilian infrastructures, which is really detrimental to them, because our evidence tells you that the US is far more reliant on digitalization than Russia, which means that it gives Russia far more power and far more advantage in any cyber attack or any cyber war that those two will get into. But second of all, they also dropped our Cambridge evidence, which states that power grids are extremely important because once these are damaged, there's going to be electricity blackout in 15 states. That's really important because 93 million people are going to not live with power, right? That's really dire because you're increasing mortality rates, which can also drop because health and safety systems fail. However, in status quo, 50,000 lives are being saved through hospitals. That's the most tangible and the most clearest impact that you're getting out of today's round. But then, going to our first contention. Against our first warrant, they said that these are only small attacks. That's not true. Russia's attacking power grids, like I just talked about my impact, that's a pretty big impact. But second of all, they say that cyber attacks slow down the chance of escalation. Our impact or our argument is not about war, right? Our argument is that a slight increase in aggression is going to do damage to critical infrastructure. But third of all, they say that the United States has to assert dominance. That's not true. Extend what Joseph said in his rebuttal. Delink that because the United States will still have access to military capability. They can still assert their dominance, but also they're not irrational actors because basically they're not both of these are not irrational actors because they act in ways that are not mutually destructive for them, right? However, attacking power grids, because it does not lead to massive destruction or massive war for them own countries themselves, that's why they're attacking power grids and that's why they're attacking critical infrastructure. But then go on to the 32% retaliation card. They said that there's little attacks on infrastructure, there's no big impact, but completely extend what I just said at the top of my summary, right, about Cambridge, how there's 93 million people that are going to live without power. But then, on to their case. Start by extending the dropped overview response which Joseph provides at the top of his rebuttal, right? We tell you that OCOs actually only came into place in 2017, and Russia has been increasing aggression since. Our empirics basically prove to you that OCOs actually provide more harms than benefits. But then going to the but then also because we went on our first contention, we also completely take over their first contention on deterring escalation, right? They have no tangible, no clear impact on their side. We're the only side that actually proves that to you. But then to the second contention about the Strait of Hormuz. This is a really problematic argument. Okay, they go for the idea that forms like Iran, we tell you that 417, that Iran won't be able to survive international response and international pressure like sanctions, for example, because they're not irrational actors, right? They don't want to face global recessions from other nations, right? They say, and furthermore, they don't prove to you that this is actually going to be a long-term impact, right? This only happens in the short term because the rational actors are actually not going to be resorting to war or conflict in the Strait of Hormuz. But second of all, onto the impact of recession, there's no clear link that there's actually going to be an increase in oil prices. But second of all, completely extend Joseph's response on how they can still resort to the 70% of oil which they also got. For these reasons, we're so proud to negate.
Okay, very good. Moving to Grand Crossfire.
Okay, so I'm just clarifying, Lauren, that when you talk about so are you saying that instead of using cyber operations, you can use conventional military strategies to show your dominance elsewhere in the world?
We're basically saying that it's not only cyber operations that have to show U.S. dominance, right? Their economy is already doing extremely well. They're producing a lot of goods and they're trading with a lot of countries, right? And from their other military bases and military defense systems, they're already number one, right? It's not only cyber operations, offensive cyber operations that they have to assert their dominance.
And we're not saying that we're going to be using these conventional nuclear weapons, it's just as a deterrence effect. But can I ask you guys a question? Sure. So what's the incentive for an attack on the Hormuz Strait again?
Okay, so what we're going for is our U.S. power and our deterrence. We're going to use Hormuz as an example, but then we're mostly going to go for the fact that deterrence is key in order to show U.S. power.
Yeah, so that's not my question, right? I'm talking about what's Iran's incentive.
Okay, I'll answer the question. We tell you that the Strait of Hormuz is a way for Iran to express their dissatisfaction and make countries listen to their interests. We see that empirically, Iran has attacked the strait many times, which was also stopped by US cyber operations. And we tell you this is going to save the strait.
So that completely takes away your argument, right? Because you told me
That
that
really
the
doesn't.
reason why they're doing it is to express their dissatisfaction. But the concession I got in second crossfire is that Iran's an irrational actor, even if they were to get an international response, and that would destroy Iran's economy. And Kevin said that's going to happen, but he said Iran's an irrational actor. But you just proved to me that Iran is a rational actor because they want other countries to listen to them. So
No, we don't see that how making countries listen to their interests is totally rational. Because of the fact that Iran has a really bad economically standing right now, we see that they're in a position but only to retaliate and continue retaliating. We see that whether we view it as a reasonable action or unreasonable action, we tell that this is still going to harm the Hormuz Strait, which US offensive cyber attacks is the only one that's stopping it.
So why would countries listen to Iran if their country's literally gonna lead to its downfall as conceded in the second crossfire because of all these sanctions?
Okay, no, okay, so like that's the exact reason why Iran's like views are irrational, because of the fact that Iran probably wants more nuclear freedom and to develop its nuclear program for the to supposedly develop nuclear weapons. What does happen then is that what does happen is that since that like view is so irrational, and then that's what people want Iran, like that's what Iran wants the international community to listen to them. That's not that in and of itself is irrational, and when Iran acts up in such a manner, it's portrayed as an irrational, it's portrayed as an unorthodox method in engaging in politics. So can we ask a question?
Sorry, that's time.
Oh, okay, never mind. Okay. Can we prep time? Alright, take a minute. One key strategical error on their side, they do not get the purpose of cyber warfare. No time in history has cyber warfare escalated to the point where infrastructures are down and it costed the economy trillions of dollars. They never provided you a single example of that. Their 32% card is literally just small bergsmanship in order to flex US power. But the fact of the matter is that when they say that conventional weapons are much better in order to show US power, that's directly going to increase tensions. That is really bad, because if you show US military power, that ultimately may justify war. Alright, let's go on to our two main voters. First is about US power. On their side, they try to say that like cyber warfare doesn't really change anything, and then they're just going to engage in small attacks. We think that small attacks are comparative much better than in our world, where we tell you if you do not affirm, what does happen is that they're going to relate to comparative normal military strategies such as sanctions and increase and putting ships somewhere. This is directly harming citizens much more than cyber warfare will ever do, because it's not going to escalate to the point where it causes billions of damage. We think the probability of it escalating is very low. They never prove to you it will escalate. They just miscut their card and they try to tell you otherwise. Alright, we think at this point, we think that like flexing using nuclear threat or like, and compared to cyber operations, we think that the probability is low. Let's go on to deterrence. They try to tell you about how like, first of all, like deterrence is bad and it's gonna go really, and it's gonna turn into like a major conflict. First of all, that never happened. Second of all, deterrence is actually used to stop like major conflicts from happening. A couple months ago, Hormuz looked like it's going to be World War III. Now it looks like nothing's gonna happen because they're stopping the critical military systems. U.S. cyber operations stop major conflicts from happening and stops the U.S. from resorting to military tactics. That's ultimately better than in their world where they do so and directly sanction these sanctioned children, and that's ultimately going to harm even more. And we think in 13 years where none of this harms happened, it is at this point where our world is much more probable and our world is much better than theirs. Thank you.
Time to clap that.
Is everybody ready? All my opponents are doing at the end of the round is joining a very, very high magnitude impact, low probability argument. Here's the reason. They talk about the Hormuz Strait, but they don't recognize two responses. First of all, they say offensive operations is deterring this attack on the Hormuz Strait, but they drop my response. Before the Trump administration and the Obama and Clinton administration, we were all about defensive operations. We did not have offensive operations back then, meaning that this attack on the Hormuz Strait should have already happened and all their impacts should have triggered. The reason why it hasn't is because of their second response that they dropped, which that if Iran were to hypothetically launch an attack, that would trigger an international response against Iran and that would cripple their economy and destruct their economy, which is why they don't have an incentive to do so. They talk about how there's going to be a global recession, but they don't interact with the logical warranty that even if we stop this 30% of global oil, countries will just turn the other 70% to stop this global recession, meaning that they don't have any impacts at the end of the round. Let's go to their case. We talk about aggression, and there's 4 reasons why offensive operations increases it. The first one is provoking our allies. Remember the Greenberg evidence. When we get more access to Russian networks, that convinces Russia to maintain the same kind of access to our networks, which is why they're going to launch even more attacks. The second is pressuring our adversaries, because what Slayton tells you is that when we launch more offensive operations, it increases distrust by both sides, and that creates a preemptive strike by both sides of the aisle. But third of all is legitimizing our opponent's actions. Because when we show that we are using offensive operations, that shows to other countries like Russia that their actions are justifiable, and that will only increase aggression by both sides. And the fourth way is backfire. They say offensive operations are key for diplomacy and solving the crisis, but our offensive operations are exactly what our adversaries want, because they don't respond to the Russia example. Russia wants to see our offensive operations because they want to analyze it and use that kind of technology to backfire against the US, which is why there's going to be a larger crisis. The empirics are disproving their case. We have offensive operations right now. Countries like Russia, China, and Iran are only attacking us and increasing aggressions, and that's all because of offensive operations. For these reasons, Lord and I are incredibly proud to negate. Thank you.